Have any of you ever been late for a wedding? Perhaps your own? I won't ask for a show of hands. Although some are volunteering, okay. I've been married twice, and the first time I got married, I got to the church on time, but my bride did not. This was a long time ago. This was in the late 80s, before we had cell phones, so there's no easy way to get a text to find out what was going on. I arrived at the church in good time, and then we waited, and we waited, and the minister gave me that look. You know, this isn't the only wedding we're doing here today. Where is she? Well, what I didn't know was that she was back at our house, which we shared with another couple, and one of our friends was going to drive her in a car that he'd rented or borrowed, I can't remember, to the church, and they were taking pictures. And she was all decked out in the white dress, and they were taking pictures outside of our house, and then the keys got locked in the car. It's like, whoa! And they couldn't break into the car for a while, and there was some debate, okay, well, how are we going to get her there? And Uber didn't exist back then, and we didn't have cell phones and stuff, so there was some debate about whether she should get into the photographer's car. And our photographer, who had been taking pictures outside of the house of her, was a surfer dude. And there was literally a surfboard strapped to the top of the car because it was the summer, and apparently when they looked inside his car, it was more beach than car. So there's just no way that white dress was going to get into that car. So she briefly considered maybe hitchhiking to her own wedding, just going out on Queen Street and sticking the thumb out. But fortunately, they found a way to break into my friend's car, and they got there just in the nick of time, and it was all okay. Well, in today's parable, the bridegroom's the one who's running late. And there are no cars. Everybody walks on foot, right? This is a village wedding. And back then, in first century Palestine, weddings were the big social highlight of the year. Everybody in the village was invited to a wedding. But weddings happened after the workday was done. And in Israel, then as now, the sun goes down between like 6:30 and 7:30, depending on the time of year. So weddings are going to happen at night. And weddings were a very big deal. They would last for days. It was a party that just kept going and going and going. And the procedure was the bridegroom would leave his father's house where he had been living and walk through the village to get to the bride's house. He'd get to the bride's house, who was often a teenager. He might be 25. She could be like 14, 15. He would get the bride, and then they would walk in a procession through the village back to the house, often the father's house, where the big party was going to be held. And so it makes sense that 10 unmarried women, called maidens in this translation, virgins in others, would get drowsy waiting for a bridegroom who'd been held up for some reason. It's dark. And they need lamps to have light. There's no street lamps back then, so the light you've got is the light you bring with you. So they get drowsy, they fall asleep, and then around midnight, the bridegroom finally arrives. And they want to go with him, but it turns out that half of the young women, unmarried women, their oil has gone down to almost nothing. They don't have enough to make the trip across the village in the dark to get to where the wedding's being held. So they ask for some oil. They're told to go into town, buy some. They eventually get to the wedding, but the bridegroom doesn't let them in. He says, I don't know you. Who are you? So they're not let in. This is a parable. Christ presents it explicitly as a parable about the kingdom of heaven. And parables aren't meant to be understood literally. And there's usually a detail which is impossible in the parable, and that's kind of like a trap door. Anyone notice what the detail was in this one? It's midnight, and the wise virgins say to the foolish virgins, we don't have enough oil to go around. Why don't you go into town and buy some? It's midnight. There's no 7-Eleven in, 2,000 years ago in Palestine. There's nowhere to buy the oil. So that's your clue. Don't interpret this literally. This is a symbolic story. And this story contains a number of rich symbols. 3 in fact. The first one is the wedding. Jesus often speaks about the kingdom of God as being like a wedding feast, where there will be dancing and singing and laughing and drinking and partying. This is his idea of heaven. You want to go to this wedding. You want to be in the kingdom of heaven because it is full of joy and rejoicing. Jesus often refers to himself as the bridegroom. I'm the one you've been waiting for to bring you to the wedding. At one point, John the Baptist's followers walk up to Jesus and say, "We don't understand. We spend all this time fasting as part of our spirituality, but your disciples are always eating and feasting, even on Sabbath days." And Jesus' retort is, when the bridegroom is with you, you do not fast. You enjoy the presence of the bridegroom. It's when the bridegroom is left that you begin to fast again. So Jesus compares himself explicitly in other stories to being the bridegroom that everyone has been waiting for before they go to this kingdom of heaven wedding feast. You may also recall, the beginning of the Gospel of John, there's a miracle, right? The turning of water into wine. It happens at a wedding. And in that story, we hear about the steward, the servants, the guests. We hear about the bridegroom, but we don't hear anything about the bride. You may have noticed in today's story, you don't hear anything about the bride either. There's young maidens, and there's the bridegroom, there's the place where the wedding is being held, but there's no mention of a bride. It's because symbolically, you are all the bride. All of you are the unmarried virgins who are awaiting to be wedded with Christ so that you can be eternally joined with the bridegroom in that wonderful eternal feast. That's why there's no mention of bride, because you are the bride. So that's the first symbol, the wedding. The second symbol is sleep. The 10 ladies get tired because it gets late, so they fall asleep. Well, one of the innovations of the Christian faith was this idea that when we die, we are resurrected, right? Jesus proved it on Easter Sunday morning, and he promised it to everyone who followed him, that death is not final. The Romans and the pagans and the Greeks at this time believed that when you die, and your soul just goes into this sort of shadowy existence down in Hades. You know, you'll be bored for the rest of time, but there's not really anything to do. Whereas Jesus is offering this fantastic wedding banquet. But you have to die first before you get to that particular experience, and that death is called sleep. And it's called sleep because you wake up. It's not final. You go to sleep, and then you wake up. So when those 10 ladies fall asleep, it's symbolic of death. They have died, and now they're waking up. But they've been promised an invitation to this kingdom of heaven wedding feast, and yet not all of them get in. So how come? That doesn't seem right. Well, it all turns on the third symbol in this story, which is that oil, right? They've got oil in their lamps, and we're told that the wise virgins also have jars of oil. So they've got some extra oil with them. At first glance, when we hear this story, we may think, okay, this is a story about the quantity of oil, because half of the virgins don't have enough to make the journey to the wedding feast. And the wise virgins say, oh, we can't share our oil. You'll have to go get some of your own. So maybe is this a story about being prepared, like Boy Scout, always be prepared? Well, if it's about the quantity of oil, then once the foolish virgins go buy some oil in the middle of the night, and they get to the wedding feast, by rights they should be let in. They've got enough oil. They just had to go buy it, but they've got enough oil. And yet, when they arrive at the door, the bridegroom says, I don't know you. I don't know anything about you. Go away. So it can't be the quantity of the oil, because all of the virgins have enough oil. there's something about the quality of the oil. There's something different between the oil that the wise virgins have and the foolish virgins get. It is different, which is making all the difference to whether they get into the wedding feast. So what is it? Well, if we think about how this story plays out, when everybody wakes up, the foolish virgins, the first thing that they say is, "Hey, we've run out of oil, give us some." It's the first note of selfishness in the story. They're going, "Hey, we don't have what we need. You give us some." And the wise virgins say, "Oh, you know what? I'm not sure we have enough oil to make the full journey to the wedding banquet." They're not being boastful or arrogant. They're actually being pretty humble about this. They're saying, "I'm not sure we have enough, but we have an idea of how you can get some. Why don't you go into town and buy some?" So they don't blow them off, and they don't say, "Hey, we've got lots of oil, sure, well," no, it's not like that at all. They're actually quite humble about it. They say, "We're not sure we have enough for this journey, but here's a way you could get some." And so the foolish virgins go off and they get some, and they come to the door. But one suspects that the way they get the oil is similar to how they got the oil in life. They got the oil because they felt they needed it for themselves. They were looking out for number one. "Hey, give me your oil." "Sorry, I'm not going to give you my oil." "Okay, I'll go get some oil for myself." And then they're surprised when they don't get in. Something about getting oil just for yourself does not get you into that wedding banquet. But the wise virgins got in. So how did they get in? What's different about their oil? Now, the fact is, this parable does not provide the answer. This parable appears at the beginning of chapter 25 of the Gospel of Matthew. There's 3 stories in this chapter. There's this one, there's a middle one about the talents, and then there's a final one, which is quite famous, where Jesus says to his disciples, "When you took care of the sick and the poor, and you visited the prisoner, and you cared for the widow and the orphan, you were taking care of me." And the disciples say to him, "Oh, Lord, how is that possible? We didn't know it was you. These were different people." And he says, "Even though you took care of them without knowing that it was me, you were taking care of me." It's very interesting. Jesus is saying, when you take care of people who are in need, who are marginalized, strangers, who may be oppressed, or they may just have fallen on hard times, when you take care of them and you're not trying to score any points by taking care of them, you're just doing it because it seems like the right thing to do, that's when you're taking care of Jesus. Mother Teresa refers to this as Jesus' distressing disguises. She met them as lepers in India, in the streets of Calcutta. Jesus is saying, you earn a relationship with me even when you don't know that you're meeting me, if you're helping people who need help, who you don't know personally. That's how you earn the oil that goes into the good virgin's lamps. Now, I see this all the time at this church. You know, we often, especially in the fall, we have bags out there for coats. We had a big clothing drive for new circles, and I couldn't believe how many garbage bags full of clothes were just piling out of the closet. You guys aren't doing that to score points. You just know it's the right thing to do. You've got a coat at home you're never going to wear again. You're going to give it to someone who's new to this country and needs warm clothes. Fabulous. When African refugees started showing up and living on the streets because the city of Toronto didn't let them into our shelters, many of you made donations so that we could help feed them at the Dominion International Church out in North York. This is happening all the time, and this is ideally what churches always do. We give you opportunities to just do the obvious right thing for people who are suffering. Now, some people may object, well, hang on a second, I'm nice. I'm constantly doing good things for my friends and my family. Surely that counts too. And you know what? Those are wonderful things. And we all know people who hold relationships together, who are constantly bringing people together. Those things are wonderful. But Christ is saying there's something else. And why would there be two different types of generosity? And why does he privilege this other one that's given to strangers? Well, when we take care of friends and family, we do it because it feels good. Because they probably love us back. Invite somebody over for dinner, there's a pretty good chance they'll invite you over for dinner. Invite someone to stay at your cottage, it's possible they'll invite you to come to their cottage. There's a degree of reciprocity, and that give and take is what makes human relationships possible. It's a virtuous circle. It's great. It's wonderful. But Jesus points out that that's different than giving help to a stranger. And at one point, earlier in the Gospel of Matthew, in chapter 5, he says this. If you could just have the slide put up there, please. For if you love those who love you, what reward do you have? Do not even the tax collectors do the same? And if you greet only your brothers and sisters, what more are you doing than others? Do not even the Gentiles do the same? We're basically programmed to love our friends and family and to have positive relationships with them where we help them, they help us. That's just part of being human. God has shared that much love into us, and we do it pretty much automatically. But doing it for strangers is harder. You don't get anything back. They may not even appreciate it. You may occasionally give money to someone who's begging on the streets, and they may shout at you as you walk by. It's entirely possible. But it's in helping the stranger that God sees that we are helping everybody, not just the ones who will be happy that we helped, not just the ones who will pay us back, not just the ones who will compliment us. When we help the stranger, we're helping all of God's children, and we're making the world as a whole a better place. And when you help the stranger and you get to that wedding banquet, Christ, the bridegroom, opens the door and goes, "Oh, I know you already. Come on in. It's lovely to see you. We've met many times. You have helped me many times." Now, not everybody does that, of course. Some people reach the end of their lives and they were wonderful friends to their family and to their friends. They just terrific. But they haven't actually helped the stranger much. Well, the good news is there's always time. The Christian New Testament is full of parables that say that even if you show up late and you do the right thing, it still counts. Right? The laborers who show up in the last hour are paid the same as the laborers who showed up in the morning. It's never too late. Our story can change, and even the story about these 10 virgins could have changed too. Let's imagine a different ending for this story. The 10 virgins wake up. 5 of them don't have very much oil on their lamp. They didn't bring extra jars, so all they got is what's in their lamp, and it's not very much. So they look at it, and they decide to share it with the wise virgins who are worried they don't have enough to make it all the way. Here, we definitely don't have enough. Have some of our oil. It might guarantee that you get there. Or maybe the wise virgins looked at all of the little bits of oil they had in their jars, in their lamps, and decided to share it with each other so one of them could get to the wedding banquet. That would have been good. And maybe for the other 4 who know that they're not going to make it to the wedding banquet, perhaps instead of hightailing it to town to buy some oil for themselves, maybe they could have just stayed and waited to meet the bridegroom. That blazing light in the darkness. I suspect that had they waited to see him, they might have gotten the invite which they've been hoping for. God's not asking for much. Just share our light in those places where darkness reigns. Bring your little bit of light in and help brighten things up. It'll make this world so much better. And apparently, there is a party waiting for you that you won't believe. Amen.